Wisdom, wisdom, that's the test. Which rival wisdom team is best? 52 teams of 8 antique rival wisdoms that have passed the test of time to encourage, educate and entertain generations for centuries.
Team 17, I work naturally. Quote definitions, biographical context and synergy analysis 2. Replace hate with motivationaleducation.com to guidealife.com. Quote 17.1. Be as you wish to seem. Socrates 470 to 399 BC. Quote definition. Authentic character is not a performance calibrated for observers, but the genuine reality of what a person actually is. Rather than managing appearance to create an impression, invest in becoming the thing you want to be seen as, because genuine being is more reliable, more sustainable, and more honoring of both self and others than the most skillful performance of it. Quote application. The mission of making America wiser and kinder cannot be performed into existence. It must be genuinely lived. Organizations and individuals who want to seem kind must actually become kind. Those who want to seem wise must actually pursue wisdom. Socrates' principle is the foundational integrity standard. Close the gap between aspiration and reality by working on the reality, not by polishing the appearance. Socrates was born around 470 BC in Athens, the son of a stonemason and a midwife. He received a basic education, served as a soldier with distinction in several campaigns, and spent the rest of his adult life doing what he considered his divine mission. Wandering the agora of Athens, engaging anyone willing in conversation about virtue, knowledge, justice, piety, and the nature of the good life. He wrote nothing. Everything we know of him comes from the accounts of his students, primarily Plato and Xenophon. He was famously ugly, snub-nosed, bulging-eyed, stocky, and famously brilliant, and the contrast between his unprepossessing appearance and his extraordinary mind was itself a demonstration of his principle. Being matters more than seeming. The instruction to be as you wish to seem is drawn from Xenophon's Memorabilia and reflects the core of Socratic ethics. That virtue is not a matter of reputation but of reality, and that the person who pursues reputation without genuine virtue has inverted the only relationship that produces actual good. Socrates had observed Athenian public life closely enough to know that it was saturated with the performance of virtue. The kind of staged goodness that courts applause while genuine character atrophies from disuse. His method, the relentless questioning of people's claims about what they knew and what they valued, was precisely an instrument for stripping away the performance and finding out what was actually there. He applied the same standard to himself. His famous ironic self-description as knowing only that he knew nothing was not false modesty, but the honest report of a man who took his own principles seriously. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Invest effort in becoming genuinely what you aspire to be rather than in managing the impression of being it. 2. Recognize that the gap between seeming and being, however skillfully managed, is experienced by others even when they cannot articulate it and erodes trust over time. 3. Apply this standard as a daily self-examination. In what areas am I working on the appearance rather than the reality, and what would it cost to close that gap? 4. Understand that genuine being is ultimately less work than sustained performance, because being is self-sustaining and performance requires constant maintenance. Socrates was tried in 399 BC on charges of impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens, convicted by a jury of 500, and executed by being required to drink hemlock. He refused multiple opportunities to escape, decline prosecution, or moderate his conduct sufficiently to avoid conviction. He died as he had lived, being exactly what he had wished to seem, a man committed to truth and integrity regardless of personal cost. The being was real. The execution proved it could not be separated from the person who had chosen it.
Quote 17.2. Friendship that can cease is never real. St. Jerome 347 to 420 AD. Quote definition. Genuine friendship is defined by its unconditional durability, a connection that dissolves under pressure, conflict, inconvenience, or changed circumstances was never the real thing, only its appearance. True friendship is not a relationship that happens to have lasted. It is a relationship built on a foundation that makes cessation impossible. Quote application. The community that replacehate.org seeks to build, of people genuinely committed to wisdom and kindness, must be built on real friendship in Jerome's sense. Connections that persist through disagreement, difficulty, and inevitable frictions of genuine human relationship. Surface-level agreement is not community. Durable connection through honest engagement is. St. Jerome appears in every team as the author of the good, better, best quote that serves as the collection's anchor. But here, in Team 17, his own original voice takes center stage for the first time. Eusebius Sophronius Hieronymus, Jerome, was born around 347 AD in Stridon, a town near the border of Dalmatia and Pannonia in what is now Croatia. He received an elite classical education in Rome under grammarian Aelius Donatus, was baptized as a Christian in his 20s, spent years as an ascetic in the Syrian desert teaching himself Hebrew, and eventually settled in Bethlehem, where he ran a monastery and produced the Vulgate, the Latin Bible that remained the standard text of Western Christianity for over 1,000 years. Jerome was famous for his learning, his productivity, and his extraordinarily difficult personality. He was caustic, combative, quick to take offense, and capable of savage attacks on people who had previously been his friends. His relationship with Rufinus of Aquileia, once a close companion, ended in a decades-long theological war conducted through pamphlets of mutual denunciation. His observation about friendship's durability is therefore not the comfortable assertion of a naturally warm person, but the hard-won insight of a man who had seen friendship fail repeatedly under the pressures of intellectual disagreement, theological controversy, and personal pride. He knew from painful experience what false friendship looked like. He had both practiced and suffered it, and his formulation of what real friendship required reflects that experience honestly. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Evaluate relationships not by their current warmth, but by their demonstrated durability through difficulty. What survives conflict and inconvenience is real. What doesn't wasn't. 2. Invest in building friendships on foundations substantial enough to withstand inevitable pressures, shared values, honest communication, genuine mutual regard, rather than on the pleasant but fragile basis of current agreement. 3. Recognize that the friendships most worth having are often the most demanding to maintain. They require honest engagement rather than comfortable performance. 4. Apply this standard to community building. Communities founded on real friendship in Jerome's sense are more resilient than those founded on shared enthusiasm alone, because the foundation holds when enthusiasm varies. Jerome's most important friendship, conducted entirely by letter across decades, was with Paula of Rome, a wealthy Roman widow who eventually moved to Bethlehem with her daughter Eustochium and established a women's monastery adjacent to Jerome's. Their intellectual and spiritual partnership, maintained across 30 years through correspondence and collaboration, was one of the most significant relationships in the history of early Christianity. It endured Jerome's difficult personality, theological controversies, and the full range of pressures that ended his other friendships, because it was built on something real. It never ceased. By his own definition, it was a genuine article.
Quote 17.3. Wealth is not his that has it, but his that enjoys it. Benjamin Franklin 1706 to 1790. Quote definition. The possession of wealth, money, resources, advantages, capabilities, has no inherent value separate from the actual enjoyment and use of it. Accumulated but unenjoyable wealth is not wealth in any meaningful sense. It is merely the appearance of wealth. True abundance is experiential, not numerical. Quote application. This principle extends far beyond money to every form of abundance, wisdom included. Wisdom accumulated but not applied, not shared, not enjoyed in the living of a better life is not genuine wisdom but it's hoarding. For replacehate.org, Franklin's principle is the case that wisdom must be actively lived and shared to be real. The 52 teams are not a collection to admire but an abundance to enjoy by using. Benjamin Franklin appears throughout these 52 teams. His extraordinary range as a thinker, writer, scientist, diplomat, and practical philosopher generates wisdom applicable to nearly every domain of human life. Born in 1706 in Boston as the 15th of 17 children of a candle and soap maker, Franklin had 2 years of formal schooling before going to work as a printer's apprentice at 12. He educated himself through voracious reading, disciplined writing practice, and the systematic observation of everything around him, and became the most versatile and most admired American of his era, the only person to have signed all four of the documents foundational to American independence: the Declaration of Independence, the Treaty of Paris, the Treaty of Alliance with France, and the Constitution. His observation about wealth and enjoyment reflects both his practical experience of money and his broader philosophy of the good life. Franklin had been genuinely poor, genuinely comfortable, and genuinely wealthy at different stages of his life, and he had observed the full range of people across the economic spectrum closely enough to know that the relationship between having and enjoying was surprisingly weak. He had watched wealthy people torture themselves with anxiety about their wealth, with the labor of accumulating more, and with the fear of losing what they had, and he had watched people of modest means enjoy genuine abundance through the intelligent use of what they possessed. His Poor Richard's Almanac returns repeatedly to variations on this theme. It is not what you have but what you do with it that constitutes real wealth. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Shift the primary measure of abundance from possession to enjoyment. What you actually experience and use is your real wealth, not what is technically yours. 2. Apply this principle to every form of resource. Time, talent, relationships, knowledge, and opportunity are only as valuable as the use made of them. 3. Recognize that the anxiety of protecting accumulated wealth in any form can consume the enjoyment that was the point of accumulation in the first place. 4. Invest in the capacity to enjoy what you have rather than in the accumulation of more that you won't enjoy either. Genuine abundance is a relationship with what you possess, not a quantity of possession. Franklin retired from active business at 42, having accumulated enough wealth to support a life of scientific inquiry, civic engagement, and public service, the activities he actually wanted to pursue. He then spent the next 50 years enjoying his wealth in exactly the sense he prescribed, using it to fund the experiments, the civic institutions, and the diplomatic missions that were his genuine passions. He founded the first public library in America, the first fire department in Philadelphia, the American Philosophical Society, and the University of Pennsylvania. His wealth became his enjoyment, became his legacy. He was, by his own standard, genuinely wealthy.
Quote 17.4. The man who has the will to undergo all labor may win to any good. Martin Luther, 1483–1546. Quote definition. The willingness to undertake whatever work a goal requires, not the pleasant parts alone, but all of it, including the difficult, tedious, and discouraging labor, is the sufficient condition for achieving any good that is achievable at all. The limiting factor is almost never capability. It is the will to sustain the full effort the goal demands. Quote application. The work of making America wiser and kinder requires exactly the comprehensive willingness Luther describes, not just the inspiring moments of connection and progress, but the unglamorous daily labor of creating content, building relationships, enduring resistance, and continuing when results are invisible. Luther's principle is the assurance. The will to undergo all the labor is the key that opens any door worth opening. Martin Luther was born in 1483 in Eilben, Saxony, the son of a copper miner who had risen to become a successful mine owner and who was determined that his son would become a lawyer. Luther studied law at the University of Erfurt until 1505, when, according to his own account, he was caught in a violent thunderstorm and, terrified, vowed to become a monk if he survived. He entered the Augustinian order, was ordained a priest, and spent the next decade in intense theological study and personal spiritual crisis that eventually produced the 95 Theses, nailed, or more likely distributed, on October 31, 1517, challenging the Church's sale of indulgences and launching the Protestant Reformation, the most consequential religious upheaval in Western history. Luther's observation about will and labor reflects his personal experience of the comprehensive, sustained, frequently terrifying effort that the Reformation required. He translated the entire Bible into German, the New Testament in 11 weeks of intensive daily work while in hiding at Wartburg Castle following his excommunication, the complete Old Testament over the subsequent decade, producing a translation that simultaneously created the standard form of the modern German language and made Scripture accessible to ordinary German-speaking people for the first time. He did this while managing a movement, conducting a voluminous correspondence, producing theological treatises, preaching, teaching, and navigating constant threats to his life and freedom. The will to undergo all labor was not a philosophical principle for Luther. It was the daily description of his working life for 40 years. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Examine the honest scope of what any meaningful goal actually requires, all the labor, not just the appealing parts, and make the will commitment to the full scope rather than an edited version. 2. Recognize that the limiting factor in most significant undertakings is not capability but the willingness to sustain effort through the difficult, boring, and discouraging portions. 3. Develop the specific sub-skills of comprehensive will, showing up when motivation is absent, continuing when results are invisible, and maintaining quality when no one is watching. 4. Apply Luther's assurance. Any good that is genuinely achievable can be won by the person who is genuinely willing to do all that winning it requires. The constraint is always will, not ability. Luther spent his final years in failing health, exhausted by decades of comprehensive labor, continuing to write, preach, and advise the movement he had launched until he died at 62. Still working, still corresponding, still undertaking the labor that the Reformation required. He had won a good of enormous consequence, the democratization of Christian scripture and the fracturing of a religious monopoly that had controlled European spiritual life for 1,000 years, through exactly the comprehensive willingness he had described. Every part of the labor, including the parts that cost him everything he had in terms of comfort, safety, and health. The will had been sufficient.
Quote 17.5. We cannot command nature except by obeying her. Francis Bacon 1561–1626. Quote definition. The only path to genuine mastery over natural forces, including human nature, social dynamics, and the physical world, is through accurate understanding of how those forces actually work and the alignment of action with that understanding. Attempting to command nature by ignoring or defying her laws produces only failure. Working with how things actually are produces genuine and sustainable results. Quote application. Hatred cannot be commanded out of existence by decree, moral pressure, or sheer force of will. It can only be transformed by understanding the conditions that produce it and working with human nature rather than against it. Bacon's principle is the case for wisdom-based approaches over purely punitive or coercive ones. Understand how people actually work and work with that understanding rather than against it. Francis Bacon appears in Team 12 as well, where his principle of making more opportunities than you find anchored the strategic agency layer of that team. Here in Team 17, his deeper philosophical insight about the relationship between understanding and mastery takes center stage. Bacon's scientific philosophy was revolutionary precisely because it inverted the relationship between knowledge and power that his predecessors had assumed. The Aristotelian tradition held that natural phenomena could be understood through pure reason, through the application of logical categories to experience. Bacon argued the opposite. Genuine understanding required the suspension of preconceived categories and the patient, systematic observation of what nature actually did under carefully designed experimental conditions. His formulation, "We cannot command nature except by obeying her," is the compressed expression of his entire scientific philosophy. To command nature, to make fire, to build bridges, to cure disease, to grow food, you must first understand the laws that govern what fire, bridges, disease, and crops actually do. And understanding those laws requires obedience to them. You must look at what is actually there, not what your theory predicts should be there. The moment you substitute your preferred conclusion for genuine observation, you lose command, because nature is indifferent to your preferences and will continue to behave according to her actual laws regardless of what you believe them to be. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Approach every significant challenge, personal, social, or practical, by first genuinely understanding how the relevant forces actually work rather than how you wish they worked. 2. Resist the temptation to command before understanding. The commands that ignore how things actually work are the ones that fail consistently and expensively. 3. Apply this principle to human nature specifically, understanding how people actually think, feel, and change, rather than how we wish they would, is the prerequisite for genuinely influencing them. 4. Recognize that working with natural forces, including the natural human need for dignity, belonging, and meaning, produces more durable results than working against them. Bacon's own life was a complicated illustration of the limits of his principle. He understood the laws of political power and institutional advancement with great precision, and used that understanding to rise to Lord Chancellor.
He was then convicted of bribery, stripped of his offices, briefly imprisoned and banned from public life. He had obeyed some of nature's laws and defied others, and the ones he defied exacted their price. He spent his final years in exactly the activity his principle prescribed: systematic empirical investigation of the natural world, including a fatal experiment in which he tested whether snow could preserve meat and contracted the pneumonia that killed him. He was obeying nature's laws about refrigeration at the moment nature's laws about exposure to cold killed him. The principle was sound. The application was imperfect. That too is natural.
Quote 17.6. Our charity begins at home, and mostly ends where it begins. Horace Smith, 1779 to 1849. Quote definition. The familiar instruction that charity begins at home is accurate. Genuine care starts with those closest to us and radiates outward. But Smith's edition of the honest observation that it mostly ends where it begins names the common failure. Most people's concern for others contracts back to the immediately personal and never extends to the broader human community it should eventually reach. Quote application. This is one of the most practically challenging quotes in the collection because it describes a genuine human tendency with uncomfortable accuracy. For replacehate.org, it names the specific limitation that the mission must help people overcome: the natural gravitational pull of concern back toward the familiar and the personal, and the work required to extend genuine care beyond the circle where it began. Horace Smith was born in 1779 in London, the son of a solicitor, and became a stockbroker, novelist, and poet whose most lasting fame came from an 1817 collaboration with his brother James. Rejected Addresses, a collection of parody poems imagining what various famous poets of the era would have written if asked to compose an address for the reopening of Drury Lane Theatre. The collection was enormously popular. Its parodies of Wordsworth, Byron, Coleridge, and others were widely considered better than the originals, and made both brothers celebrities in London literary circles. Horace went on to write a series of historical novels in the manner of Walter Scott, was a friend of Shelley and Keats, and was known throughout his life for genuine personal generosity, including substantial financial support of Shelley during periods of that poet's chronic poverty. Smith's observation about charity beginning at home and mostly ending there is drawn from the tradition of proverb refinement that characterized much of 18th and 19th century aphoristic writing, taking a received wisdom and adding the qualifying observation that makes it more honest and more useful. The original proverb, usually attributed to Terence and later John Wycliffe, captures something true. Genuine charity must be grounded in real relationship and real knowledge of need, which starts close to home. Smith's edition captures something equally true. The gravitational pull of personal concern is powerful enough that most people's generosity never travels further than their immediate circle, and the principle that was meant to describe a starting point becomes, in practice, the finishing point as well. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Acknowledge the honest truth of the observation, that concern naturally contracts toward the personal, as the first step toward actively resisting the contraction. 2. Treat the home as a starting point for the expansion of concern rather than its limit. Charity that begins at home should use that foundation to extend outward, not to justify stopping there. 3. Develop the specific habits and practices that extend genuine care beyond the immediately personal, not as an obligation, but as the natural next step of concern that has actually deepened. 4. Apply this principle to community building. Genuine communities of wisdom and kindness must actively work against the gravitational pull that would keep concern limited to the already familiar. Horace Smith's own life was an illustration of the principle in both its failure and its partial success. His personal generosity, to Shelley, to friends in need, to charitable causes, extended considerably beyond his immediate family circle. But his literary and social world remained, by modern standards, fairly bounded. The concerns of London literary society, the English middle and upper classes, the relatively narrow bandwidth of his social circle. He extended further than most. He did not extend as far as his own principle might have demanded. He named the failure honestly, which is itself a form of the extended concern that the failure describes.
Quote 17.7. Patience will achieve more than force. Edmund Burke 1729 to 1797. Quote definition. In the long run and across most domains of genuine consequence, human relationships, social change, the growth of wisdom and character, patient, sustained, well-directed effort produces more lasting and more significant results than forceful, urgent, coercive pressure. Force can compel. Only patience can transform. Quote application. The work of replacing hate with wisdom cannot be forced. Hatred does not yield to compulsion but only to genuine transformation of understanding, which takes time. Burke's principle is the case for the long game. Patient, consistent, sustained engagement with people and communities over time produces the changes that forceful confrontation cannot reach. Edmund Burke appears in Teams 8 and 15 as well. His observation about universal toleration anchored Team 8's prevention framework, and his identification of the lie as the universal handle for sin anchored Team 15's truth foundation. Here, in Team 17, his practical political wisdom takes a different form. The hard-won understanding that patience consistently outperforms force in the arenas that matter most. Burke arrived at this principle from decades of practical political engagement with some of the most complex and intractable problems of the 18th century. The American crisis, the Irish situation, the impeachment of Warren Hastings, the response to the French Revolution. In each case, he watched forceful approaches, military suppression, coercive legislation, punitive measures, produce resistance, radicalization, and the hardening of exactly the positions they were meant to overcome. And in each case, he argued for patient, understanding-based approaches that worked with the grain of human nature and social reality rather than against it. Conciliation with the American colonies, Catholic emancipation in Ireland, patient constitutional reform rather than revolutionary rupture. He was right about all of it, and was ignored by the people with the power to act on his counsel, and watched the predictable consequences unfold with the particular anguish of someone who had both predicted them and been unable to prevent them. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Choose the long-term transformative approach over the short-term coercive one when the goal is genuine change rather than mere compliance. 2. Recognize that force typically produces the appearance of change rather than its substance. Compliance under compulsion is not transformation and reverses when the compulsion is removed. 3. Develop the specific discipline of patience in the work of social change. The willingness to sustain effort over the time periods that genuine transformation actually requires. 4. Apply Burke's hard-won political wisdom to personal relationships as well. The patient, understanding-based approach to conflict and disagreement consistently outperforms the forceful, pressure-based one in producing lasting change. Burke's most famous pamphlet, Reflections on the Revolution in France, published in 1790, was a passionate argument for exactly this principle applied to political change, that the patient, evolutionary reform of existing institutions would produce better and more durable results than the forceful, total destruction of them and their replacement with theoretically perfect alternatives. The French Revolution's descent into the Terror seemed to confirm his analysis. But his deeper argument, that patience achieves more than force because genuine transformation requires working with human nature rather than overriding it, applies far beyond the specific political context that produced it.
Quote 17.8. When you doubt, abstain. Ambrose Bierce, 1842-1914. Quote definition. Doubt, genuine uncertainty about whether an action is right, safe, or wise, is not merely a psychological state to be resolved and set aside. It is information, a signal from conscience, experience, or intuition that the situation deserves more careful attention before proceeding. The appropriate response to that signal is restraint, not acceleration. Quote application. In the work of spreading wisdom and replacing hate, doubt about whether a particular approach, message, or action truly serves the mission is a signal worth heeding. Bierce's principle is the discipline of restraint in the face of genuine uncertainty, which prevents the enthusiastic but mistaken action that does more harm than the inaction it was trying to avoid. Ambrose Gwinnett Bierce was born in 1842 in Meigs County, Ohio, the 10th of 13 children of a farmer who gave all his children names beginning with the letter A. He enlisted in the Union Army at 18, served throughout the Civil War, including at the battles of Shiloh and Chickamauga, some of the bloodiest engagements of the war, was seriously wounded at Kennesaw Mountain in 1864, and emerged from the war with a direct experience of violence, death, and institutional incompetence that shaped everything he subsequently wrote. He became a journalist and satirist in San Francisco and London, producing the columns and stories that established his reputation as the most acerbic wit in American letters. Bitter Bierce, as he was called, culminating in the Devil's Dictionary, a collection of sardonic definitions that remains one of the sharpest pieces of social criticism in the American canon. Bierce's instruction to abstain when in doubt was drawn from military experience as much as philosophical conviction. He had served in an army where the gap between command confidence and tactical reality was frequently lethal, where officers who should have doubted acted with fatal certainty, and where the soldiers who paid the price were rarely the ones making the decisions. He had also seen the opposite, the paralysis of excessive doubt that produced its own casualties. His formulation is not when you doubt, stop forever, but when you doubt, abstain, a temporary, responsive restraint that allows the doubt to be examined rather than overridden. Is the practical wisdom of a man who had watched premature action destroy what more patient assessment might have saved. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Treat doubt as information rather than as an obstacle to be overcome. What is the doubt telling you about what might be wrong with the proposed action? 2. Develop the discipline of restraint in face of uncertainty, the willingness to pause, examine the doubt, and proceed only when it has been honestly addressed. 3. Recognize that the cost of thoughtful abstention is almost always lower than the cost of enthusiastic action that the doubt was correctly warning against. 4. Apply this principle to the work of wisdom sharing specifically. Doubt about whether a message, approach, or action truly serves human dignity is a signal worth taking seriously before proceeding. Ambrose Bierce disappeared in Mexico in 1913 or 1914 at approximately 71 years of age, having traveled there to observe the Mexican Revolution. He was never found. His final letters were characteristically sardonic, suggesting he expected not to return and was not particularly troubled by the prospect. He had lived by his own principle where it mattered, when in genuine doubt about whether his acerbic style was serving truth or merely entertaining cruelty, he frequently chose to abstain, to leave the sharpest observations unpublished, the most personal attacks undelivered. The Devil's Dictionary is as sharp as it is partly because Bierce exercised the restraint his principle prescribed. What he left out is as much a part of the work as what he included.
How they work together as a unified philosophy. The work naturally framework. Authenticity layer. Being over seeming and durable connection. Quotes 1-2. Socrates. Establish the foundational integrity standard. Be as you wish to seem. Making genuine reality the investment rather than the performance of it, and closing the gap between aspiration and actuality by working on the actuality. Jerome. Define genuine connection by the same durability standard. Friendship that can cease is never real, so that the authenticity Socrates prescribes in the individual extends to the relationships that authentic individuals build. Together, ground the entire framework in authenticity as the operating standard for both the self and its relationships. Socrates establishes that genuine being is more valuable and more sustainable than its performance. Jerome applies the same standard to connection. The friendships and communities built on genuine substance endure, while those built on performance dissolve when the performance becomes inconvenient. Together they describe the authentic life as one that is real in both its inner character and its outer relationships. Abundance layer. Enjoyed wealth and willingness to labor. Quotes 3-4. Franklin. Redefine wealth as enjoyed abundance rather than possessed accumulation. Shifting the measure of genuine richness from what you have to what you actually experience and use. Luther. Provide the work ethic that makes genuine abundance possible. The comprehensive will to undergo all labor that any good goal requires, not just the pleasant portions. Together, define the complete relationship between effort and abundance. Luther establishes what genuine achievement requires, the will to undergo all the labor, including the unglamorous parts, while Franklin establishes what genuine achievement produces, not merely possession but the actual enjoyment of what the labor has won. Together they describe the natural work ethic, Labor comprehensively for what genuinely matters, then genuinely enjoy what the labor produces, rather than hoarding it anxiously or pursuing more for its own sake. Natural law layer. Working with reality and extending beyond self, quotes 5-6. Bacon. Establish the operating principle for working with natural forces. We can only command nature by obeying her, making accurate understanding of how things actually work the prerequisite for genuine and sustainable mastery. Smith. Name the specific failure that working naturally must overcome. Charity that begins at home and mostly ends there, as the gravitational pull of personal concern that works against the extension of genuine care beyond the immediately familiar. Together, identify both the method and the challenge of natural work. Bacon provides the method. Understand how things actually are and work with that understanding rather than against it. Smith names the challenge. The natural tendency of human concern to contract back to the personal is itself one of nature's laws that must be understood and worked with if genuine extension of care is to be achieved. Together they describe the naturally working person as one who understands human nature honestly enough to see both its capacities and its gravitational limitations. Wisdom layer. Patient achievement and doubting wisely, quotes 7-8. Burke. Provide the temporal principle that governs how natural work proceeds. Patience achieves more than force, because genuine transformation works with the grain of human nature and social reality rather than attempting to override it. Bierce. Complete the framework with the discipline of doubt-informed restraint. When you doubt, abstain, as the practice that prevents the enthusiastic but mistaken action that natural work's patience is specifically designed to avoid. Together, define the pace and the discipline of naturally effective work. Burke establishes that genuine transformation requires the patience to work at the speed human nature actually changes rather than the speed institutional urgency demands. Bierce ensures that the patience Burke prescribes is genuinely reflective rather than merely slow, that the pauses are used to examine doubt honestly, so that when action eventually proceeds, it proceeds on solid ground. Together they describe the naturally wise worker. Patient enough to let transformation take the time it requires, disciplined enough to use doubt as a guide rather than an obstacle.
Free Easy Extra Advantage Math, Spelling and Reading Workbooks you can download for free at stop2think.com or buy at educationstopshate.com. Free Easy Math Wisdom Workbooks with octo repetition to grow math self-confidence. You'll get plenty of repetitive practice of age ranges and averages of our 52 teams of 8 quote authors. Free Easy Alpha Cipher-coded puzzles teach letters, numbers, and phrases using antique wisdoms that encourage and educate. Can you decode this cipher quote of encouragement using either our Learning to Spell or just for fun instructions? And since time is money, practice reading faster with 52 teams of antique rival wisdoms that have passed the test of time to encourage, educate, and entertain generations for centuries. We offer printed versions and timed videos with background music. Sign up for free weekly emails of 52 teams of antique rival wisdom workbooks with easy math, spelling, and reading practice. And, if you'd like to get paid for sharing our wearable wisdoms, keep this in mind. Everyone I know wears a shirt, and most of us change them daily, so change your shirt and change the world. Social equalities are blatantly subliminal antique positive wisdoms repetitively shared without saying a word. This applies to all our wearable shareable wisdoms. Like pretty witty baby onesies and baby tees that you and others will see and read multiple times a day. The same is true with pretty witty kids, but they'll also share these wisdoms with anyone that can read at daycare or school. Youthful truths let your kids gain confidence sharing antique wisdoms with their friends. Imagine them sharing words of wisdom with classmates and teachers. Therefore I think tees I wear is a super easy way to share words of wisdom that have passed the test of time. Our social equalities help make us all wiser and kinder with blatantly subliminal messages promoting a more fair and equal opportunity society for all. And don't forget our giftwisdoms.com for birthdays and holidays that makes it easy to share the wisdom with clothing, coffee mugs, and magnets. So do the future a favor by encouraging, educating, and entertaining with words of wisdom that have passed the test of time to make us all wiser and kinder. With wearable wisdoms to fit babies, kids, and adults. You can clothe a whole family, city, or state. Join the 52 of 8 today.